The military training environment is one of the most grueling and transformative experiences a soldier can endure. From the moment they step into this domain, they are stripped of comfort and familiarity, plunged into a world where every element conspires to challenge their body, mind, and spirit. Training is not simply a process of instruction. It is an ordeal designed to forge warriors capable of operating under the most extreme conditions imaginable. It is in these places, where survival itself feels tenuous, that soldiers learn the skills and discipline necessary to navigate the chaos of the battlefield. The training grounds themselves are as varied as the missions for which soldiers prepare. Remote locations are chosen for their ability to replicate the environmental and psychological challenges of real-world operations. Each landscape has its unique personality, its specific set of trials. In the icy tundras of Alaska, soldiers contend with blistering winds and temperatures that plunge well below freezing. The simple act of movement becomes a test of willpower as snow and ice sap energy and strength. Frostbite and hypothermia are constant threats, requiring soldiers to master techniques for maintaining body heat and recognizing the early signs of danger. These skills, essential for survival in polar conditions, are practiced until they become instinctive. Further south, in the arid deserts of Nevada, the challenges are of an entirely different nature. The relentless sun scorches the earth, and temperatures can soar past 40 degrees Celsius during the day, only to plummet dramatically at night. Dehydration is a daily battle, as is the need to manage the weight of equipment while conserving energy for long treks across barren landscapes. Here, shade is a luxury, and every drop of water is a resource to be guarded jealously. Dust storms can appear without warning, reducing visibility to mere inches and filling the air with choking clouds of sand. Navigating these conditions demands not only physical resilience, but also an acute awareness of one's environment and a deep respect for its power. Forests and jungles, with their dense foliage and treacherous undergrowth, present yet another type of trial. In places like the Pacific Northwest, the terrain is uneven, and visibility is often limited to just a few meters. The air is thick with moisture, and the ground is a mosaic of mud and tangled roots that threaten to trip the unwary. Moving silently through such terrain requires a mastery of stealth and balance, skills that are vital for reconnaissance missions or ambush scenarios. The sensory overload of the forest, where every rustle of leaves or chirp of insects can seem significant, tests a soldier's ability to remain focused and composed. Mountainous regions, such as the Rockies, demand endurance and adaptability. Soldiers must carry heavy packs up steep inclines, navigating narrow trails that offer little margin for error. The thin air at high altitudes challenges the lungs, while the harsh winds strip away body heat with alarming speed. In such conditions, even basic tasks like setting up camp or preparing a meal become Herculean efforts. The risk of injury is omnipresent, as loose rocks and unstable ground can give way without warning. Despite these dangers, the mountains teach invaluable lessons about perseverance and resourcefulness. The soldiers who train here emerge with a deep appreciation for the terrain and the knowledge that strength alone is not enough. Strategy and teamwork are equally vital. But the challenges of military training are not confined to the physical realm. The psychological toll of this environment is immense. Isolation is a key component of the training experience, as soldiers are often removed from the comforts of home and placed in remote, unfamiliar locations. The absence of family, friends, and the routines of daily life creates a void that can weigh heavily on the mind. Soldiers must learn to rely on their comrades, forging bonds that will sustain them through the trials ahead. At the same time, they are forced to confront their own vulnerabilities, as the solitude of the wilderness amplifies feelings of doubt and fear. This isolation is further heightened by the eerie stillness of the training grounds. In the dead of night, when the campfire has burned low and the forest is cloaked in darkness, the mind becomes a breeding ground for unease. The sounds of the wilderness, branches creaking in the wind, animals moving through the underbrush, can take on an almost sinister quality. Even the most seasoned soldiers have reported moments when the line between reality and imagination begins to blur. Shadows seem to shift and move at the edge of vision, and the faintest sound can spark a primal fear that is difficult to shake. These psychological pressures are not accidental but deliberate. They are designed to simulate the mental strain of combat, where uncertainty and danger are constant companions. By exposing soldiers to these stresses in a controlled environment, trainers prepare them to manage fear and make rational decisions under pressure. It is a process that demands immense mental resilience and a willingness to confront one's own limits. For some, this crucible becomes a transformative experience, a proving ground where they discover reserves of strength and determination they never knew they possessed. For others, it is a sobering reminder of their own fragility and the need for continuous growth and adaptation. Despite the hardships, the training environment is not without its rewards. Every challenge overcome, every skill mastered, adds to a soldier's confidence and capability. The wilderness, with all its dangers, becomes a silent teacher, imparting lessons that cannot be learned in a classroom. Soldiers learn to read the landscape, to recognize patterns and signs that might indicate a threat or an opportunity. They develop an acute awareness of their surroundings, a sixth sense that can mean the difference between life and death in a combat zone. Moreover, the bonds formed during training are among the strongest a person can experience. Shared hardship has a way of forging connections that transcend differences in background or personality. The camaraderie that develops among soldiers is a source of strength and comfort, a reminder that no challenge is faced alone. These relationships, built on trust and mutual respect, often endure long after the training has ended. The military training environment is, in many ways, a microcosm of the challenges soldiers will face in the field. It is a place where every weakness is exposed, every mistake magnified, but it is also a place of growth and discovery, where soldiers learn not only to survive, but to thrive under conditions that would break most people. It is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the extraordinary potential that lies within those who choose to serve. As the training progresses, soldiers begin to see the world differently. The wilderness, once a source of fear and uncertainty, becomes a place of possibility. The skills they acquire, navigating by the stars, building shelters from natural materials, improvising solutions to unexpected problems, become second nature. These lessons extend beyond the battlefield, shaping the way they approach challenges in every aspect of their lives. The military training environment is not just a test of endurance, it is a rite of passage. It transforms ordinary individuals into extraordinary leaders, capable of making life and death decisions under the most trying circumstances. It is a place where fear is confronted and conquered, where strength is tempered by wisdom, and where the indomitable spirit of the warrior is forged. The natural environment plays an integral role in shaping the military training experience. Climate and terrain are not just backdrops for physical and mental challenges, they are dynamic adversaries, constantly shifting and imposing new trials. Each type of climate and terrain presents unique difficulties, ensuring that soldiers develop a broad set of skills applicable to the diverse theaters of war. These environments are meticulously chosen to test adaptability, resilience, and the ability to perform under stress. In the Arctic expanses of Alaska, training is conducted in conditions that stretch the limits of human endurance. Snow blankets the ground, forming a stark, unbroken white landscape that reflects the pale, diffuse light of the winter sun. The air is sharp and biting, its chill sinking deep into exposed skin. Soldiers are trained to identify and mitigate the risks of frostbite and hypothermia, conditions that can incapacitate even the strongest individuals within minutes. They learn to create shelters from snow, to start fires with minimal resources, and to navigate when landmarks are obscured by blizzards. Physical activity becomes a necessity not only for survival, but also for maintaining morale. The cold saps strength, slows reflexes, and dulls the mind, but it also serves as a relentless teacher, demanding focus and preparation. The challenges of the cold are compounded by the isolation of these icy landscapes. In training scenarios, soldiers are often deployed in small groups, with only the howling wind and the crunch of boots on snow to break the silence. The vastness of the tundra can make even seasoned individuals feel small and vulnerable, a humbling reminder of nature's indifference. But within this isolation lies an opportunity for growth. Soldiers learn to find strength in their camaraderie, to support one another through long, frigid nights and the mental strain of extended deployments in hostile environments. In stark contrast to the Arctic are the sun-scorched deserts of Nevada, where heat and dehydration become the primary adversaries. Here, the landscape is a study in extremes: endless stretches of barren sand, jagged outcrops of rock, and the occasional dry riverbed cutting through the terrain. Temperatures can soar to dangerous levels, baking the ground and creating a shimmering haze that distorts vision. The simple act of walking becomes arduous, as the heat saps energy and depletes hydration levels with alarming speed. In this environment, water is a soldier's most precious resource. Training exercises emphasize careful rationing, the importance of staying hydrated, and recognizing the early signs of heat exhaustion and heat stroke. Soldiers are taught to find or create shade, to use clothing and gear to protect against the sun's relentless glare, and to conserve energy during the hottest parts of the day. The desert also teaches the value of patience and precision. Movement must be calculated, and decisions must be made with an understanding of the environment's unforgiving nature. Desert survival is not only about combating the heat, it is also about navigating the landscape. The absence of clear landmarks can make orientation challenging, particularly during sandstorms that reduce visibility to near zero. Soldiers are trained to rely on tools like compasses and GPS devices, but are also encouraged to develop an intuitive understanding of the terrain. Reading the patterns of wind-carved dunes, observing the position of the sun, and even noting the behavior of wildlife become crucial skills. These lessons instill a deep respect for the desert and its ability to test human limits. In the lush forests of the Pacific Northwest, the challenges shift once again. Here, the air is heavy with moisture, and the ground is perpetually damp, creating a different kind of physical and psychological strain. Thick undergrowth and towering trees limit visibility, forcing soldiers to rely on sound and intuition to detect potential threats. The forest is alive with activity. Birds call from the canopy, insects buzz incessantly, and small animals scurry through the underbrush. While these sounds can be a source of comfort, affirming the presence of life, they can also heighten anxiety, as the forest's density makes it difficult to distinguish between harmless activity and genuine danger. The damp environment poses unique risks. Wet clothing and gear can lead to hypothermia, even in relatively mild temperatures, and the constant exposure to moisture increases the risk of fungal infections and other ailments. Soldiers must learn to keep their equipment dry, to construct shelters that provide effective protection against the elements, and to maintain hygiene despite the challenges. The forest also demands a different approach to movement. Unlike the open spaces of the tundra or desert, where speed and visibility are paramount, the forest requires stealth and careful planning. Every step must be deliberate to avoid making noise or leaving traces that could betray one's position. The psychological impact of the forest is subtle but profound. The close quarters and limited visibility can create a sense of confinement. Even in the vastest woodlands, soldiers may feel watched, their imaginations playing tricks as shadows shift and branches sway in the wind. These conditions test not only physical endurance but also mental discipline, as soldiers must remain calm and focused in an environment that can feel oppressive and disorienting. Mountainous regions, like those found in the Rockies, combine elements of all these environments while adding their own unique challenges. The thin air at high altitudes makes every physical task more demanding, as the body struggles to take in enough oxygen to sustain effort. Soldiers must acclimate to these conditions gradually, learning to pace themselves and conserve energy. The terrain itself is a constant hazard. Loose rocks, narrow trails, and steep inclines require sure footing and careful navigation. Even a small misstep can have catastrophic consequences. In addition to these physical challenges, mountains often present unpredictable weather. A sunny morning can give way to sudden storms, with torrential rain, hail, or even snow sweeping in without warning. Soldiers must be prepared for rapid changes in conditions, carrying gear that allows them to adapt to a wide range of scenarios. They are trained to read the sky, to recognize signs of impending weather shifts, and to respond quickly and effectively. Despite their dangers, mountains also offer moments of profound beauty and clarity. The view from a high ridge, with the world spread out below, can be a powerful reminder of why soldiers endure such hardships. These moments of connection with the natural world provide a counterbalance to the rigors of training, a brief respite that rejuvenates the spirit and reinforces the sense of purpose that drives them forward. Through all these environments, one theme remains constant: the need for adaptability. Soldiers are taught to approach each challenge with an open mind, to learn from their surroundings, and to draw on their training to overcome obstacles. The climate and terrain are not merely obstacles to be conquered but partners in the process of growth and development. They teach humility, patience, and the value of preparation, lessons that are as applicable to the battlefield as they are to everyday life. In the end, the diverse climates and terrains of military training serve a greater purpose than simply preparing soldiers for specific missions. They instill a deep respect for the natural world, an understanding of its power, and an appreciation for the resilience required to thrive within it. These experiences shape not only the skills and capabilities of the soldiers, but also their character, leaving an indelible mark that carries through their careers and beyond. Isolation is a defining feature of the military training experience, a deliberate element designed to stretch the limits of human resilience and adaptability. Removed from the comforts of home, family, and the predictable routines of civilian life, soldiers are thrust into environments where their mental and emotional strength are tested as rigorously as their physical capabilities. This enforced solitude is not merely about separation from society. It is a controlled exercise in confronting the self, the unknown, and the elements of fear that thrive in such conditions. The feeling of isolation often begins the moment soldiers arrive at their training grounds. These locations, often remote and difficult to access, are chosen not only for their challenging terrain, but also for their ability to induce a sense of detachment. Vast stretches of wilderness surround them, an unbroken expanse of trees, mountains, or desert that seems to close in with each passing day. Communication with the outside world is limited, if not entirely cut off, leaving soldiers reliant on their immediate environment and the camaraderie of their fellow trainees. For many, the absence of familiar comforts, warm beds, home-cooked meals, the hum of urban life, creates an immediate sense of vulnerability. It is not the kind of vulnerability that comes from a lack of physical protection, but rather the profound realization of how small and fragile one is in the face of nature's immensity. The wilderness does not yield to human presence. It merely tolerates it. This humbling realization is both a challenge and an opportunity. Soldiers must learn to coexist with the environment, to respect its dangers while drawing strength from its stark beauty. The psychological effects of isolation are multifaceted. One of the most immediate challenges is coping with the silence. In urban or suburban settings, silence is often a luxury, a brief respite from the constant noise of human activity. In the wilderness, however, silence takes on a different quality. It is vast and unrelenting, broken only by the sounds of wind, water, and the occasional rustle of wildlife. For some, this silence is a source of peace, a chance to focus and reflect. For others, it becomes oppressive, amplifying feelings of loneliness and unease. In this silence, the mind begins to wander. Soldiers find themselves replaying memories, contemplating their choices, and imagining scenarios both real and imagined. This introspection can be a double-edged sword. While it offers an opportunity for self-discovery, it also opens the door to doubt and fear. In the absence of external distractions, inner struggles become more pronounced. Questions about one's purpose, capabilities, and future can arise, demanding resolution in an environment that offers little comfort or reassurance. The nights in these training environments are particularly challenging. As darkness falls, the familiar becomes unfamiliar, and the mind starts to fill the void with imagined threats. The forest that seemed serene during the day takes on a menacing quality, its shadows and shapes hinting at unseen dangers. The creak of a tree branch or the distant call of an animal can trigger an adrenaline response, a reminder of the primal instincts that lie dormant in even the most disciplined individuals. Sleep, an essential component of recovery and mental clarity, often becomes elusive. Soldiers lie awake, their minds racing as they listen to the sounds of the night. Fatigue accumulates, further eroding their mental resilience. In these moments, the training takes on a deeper dimension. It is no longer just about mastering physical skills or surviving the elements. It is about mastering the self, about finding calm and focus amidst chaos. Camaraderie becomes a lifeline in this context. The shared experience of isolation forges bonds that are as strong as they are essential. Soldiers rely on one another not only for practical support, but also for emotional sustenance. A kind word, a shared laugh, or even a simple gesture of solidarity can make the difference between despair and determination. These relationships, formed in the crucible of adversity, often endure long after the training has ended. They are a testament to the power of human connection in the face of isolation. Despite the challenges, isolation also offers unique opportunities for growth. It strips away distractions and forces individuals to confront their true selves. In the absence of external validation, soldiers must find their own sources of strength and motivation. They learn to trust their instincts, to rely on their training, and to draw inspiration from the natural world around them. The solitude, while difficult, becomes a space for transformation, a place where resilience and self-reliance are cultivated. The harshness of the environment amplifies the psychological strain of isolation. In extreme climates, where survival depends on constant vigilance and adaptability, the pressure can be relentless. In the frozen tundras of the north, soldiers must contend with the constant threat of frostbite and hypothermia. The cold seeps into their bones, numbing fingers and toes, and sapping energy with each passing hour. The struggle to stay warm becomes a metaphor for the broader struggle to maintain hope and determination. In the desert, the challenges are equally daunting but take a different form. The sun beats down mercilessly during the day, while the nights bring a chill that feels almost cruel in its intensity. Sand infiltrates every crevice of clothing and gear, a constant irritant that tests patience as much as endurance. Water, the most basic of human needs, becomes a precious commodity, its scarcity a stark reminder of the fragility of life. In the forest, the dampness creates its own set of difficulties. Clothing and equipment become perpetually wet, adding to the discomfort and increasing the risk of illness. The dense foliage restricts movement and visibility, creating a sense of claustrophobia even in the midst of vast wilderness. Every step must be taken with care, every decision made with the knowledge that the margin for error is slim. Through all of this, the soldiers are not only tested, but also transformed. Isolation and harshness reveal the limits of human endurance, but they also highlight its extraordinary potential. Soldiers discover strengths they never knew they possessed, reserves of courage and determination that carry them through even the darkest moments. They learn to adapt to their circumstances, to find solutions to problems that seem insurmountable, and to persevere despite the odds. The lessons of isolation extend far beyond the training grounds. They prepare soldiers for the realities of combat, where separation from loved ones, uncertainty, and constant danger are part of daily life. More importantly, they instill a sense of humility and perspective. The isolation and challenges of training remind soldiers of their place in the world, of the interconnectedness of all things, and of the importance of resilience in the face of adversity. In the end, the experience of isolation is not just a test, it is a rite of passage. It strips away the superficial and reveals what lies beneath. It is a journey into the heart of what it means to be human, to face fear and uncertainty with courage, and to emerge stronger and more capable on the other side. In the vast expanse of the Cascade Mountains, shrouded in a perpetual mist that clung to the trees and valleys, Sergeant Ethan had found himself on a journey that would test not only his skills as a soldier, but also the limits of his endurance, faith, and understanding of the unknown. Ethan, a seasoned soldier in the United States Army, had been through numerous deployments, rigorous training exercises, and moments of sheer terror on the battlefield. Yet nothing in his years of service had prepared him for what he would encounter during a training mission in this remote and unforgiving terrain. Ethan was not the kind of man to scare easily, with a tall, muscular build and sharp blue eyes that seemed to pierce through deception. He had earned a reputation among his peers as a leader who could remain calm under pressure. His voice carried an authority that inspired confidence, and his actions reflected a man who took pride in his ability to guide others through adversity. It was this reputation that had earned him the role of squad leader for a specialized training exercise deep in the Cascade Mountains. The mission was straightforward on paper. Ethan and his team were to spend 10 days navigating the rugged terrain, surviving off the land, and conducting simulated reconnaissance operations. They were provided minimal supplies, a standard tactic to simulate wartime resource scarcity, and tasked with using their training to adapt to the environment. The Cascade Mountains, with their steep cliffs, dense forests, and unpredictable weather, were the perfect setting for such an exercise. But for Ethan, it wasn't the terrain that worried him. It was the growing unease he felt the moment their transport helicopter dropped them at the edge of the wilderness. The air had an unnatural stillness that morning. As the helicopter's rotors stirred the mist into swirling patterns, Ethan stood with his squad, their boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. The faint hum of the departing aircraft faded into the distance, leaving them in silence. It wasn't just the absence of noise. It was the weight of that silence that unsettled him. The forest, which should have been alive with the sounds of birds and rustling leaves, seemed eerily subdued. Even the distant mountains appeared darker, their peaks shrouded in clouds that seemed almost too dense to be natural. Ethan shook off the feeling, attributing it to premonition nerves. He had been through enough deployments to know that the mind could play tricks in unfamiliar environments. Yet, as the team began their trek into the forest, the sense of unease only grew. The trees were taller than he expected, their trunks thick and ancient, with moss draping over their bark like a veil. The canopy above was so dense that it blocked out much of the daylight, casting the forest floor in a dim, greenish hue. The air was heavy with moisture, and the ground beneath their feet was a patchwork of mud and tangled roots. Despite these challenges, the first few days of the exercise proceeded as planned. Ethan's team, composed of 5 soldiers, worked efficiently to establish their rhythm. They divided tasks evenly. 2 would scout ahead, 2 would manage the camp, and Ethan would oversee operations while handling navigation. Their training had prepared them well for the physical demands of the mission. They constructed shelters from branches and tarps, started fires in the rain with waterproof matches, and purified water from nearby streams. But as the days wore on, small anomalies began to disrupt their progress. The first incident was minor but unsettling. One evening, as they were setting up camp, Corporal Hayes, the youngest member of the team, reported hearing faint whispers in the forest. He claimed it sounded like a conversation, too distant to make out clearly but undeniably human. The others dismissed it as the wind or Hayes's imagination. But Ethan couldn't shake the look of genuine fear in the corporal's eyes. That night, as he lay in his sleeping bag under the improvised shelter, Ethan found himself straining to listen for any sound beyond the crackle of their campfire. There was nothing. The next few days brought more peculiar occurrences. Equipment began to malfunction without explanation. Their compass needles spun erratically, and their radios emitted bursts of static that seemed to coincide with certain locations. At one point, Sergeant Miller, Ethan's second-in-command, discovered strange markings etched into the bark of a tree near their camp. The symbols were crude yet deliberate, resembling a series of intersecting lines and spirals. Miller suggested they were the work of local hikers or hunters, but Ethan found it hard to believe. The area was far too remote for casual visitors. By the 5th night, tensions within the team were palpable. Exhaustion and the growing sense of unease had taken their toll. Ethan tried to maintain a facade of calm, reassuring his squad that these were all coincidences, explainable phenomena that they were overanalyzing due to the isolation. But in truth, he was struggling to reconcile his own doubts. The forest seemed to be watching them. He often caught himself glancing over his shoulder, half expecting to see movement in the shadows. He dismissed these thoughts as paranoia, but they lingered like a thorn in his mind. It was on the sixth night that the situation escalated. The team had set up camp near a small clearing, using the open space to better monitor their surroundings. The fire was burning low when Ethan was awoken by a sharp, metallic clang. He bolted upright, his hand instinctively reaching for the sidearm at his hip. The others were already stirring, their faces pale in the dim firelight. The sound had come from the direction of their supply cache. A few meters away, Ethan signaled for Miller to follow him and crept toward the source of the noise. What they found was both baffling and alarming. The metal container that held their rations had been moved several feet from its original position. Its lid was open, and several packages of food were missing. There were no signs of animal tracks or human footprints around the area, only the faint impression of something heavy being dragged through the dirt. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. Whatever had taken their supplies had done so with a level of stealth and precision that was unnerving. The following morning, the team discovered more evidence of an intruder. In the clearing where they had camped, there were deep, narrow impressions in the soil, spaced too far apart to belong to any known animal. The marks were faint but unmistakable, as if something with elongated limbs had passed through during the night. Ethan decided to break camp early and move to a different location. He rationalized the decision as a precaution against wildlife, but in truth, he wanted to put as much distance as possible between them and whatever had left those tracks. As the days stretched into nights, Ethan's leadership was tested like never before. The team's morale began to fray under the weight of sleepless nights, dwindling supplies, and the relentless sense of being watched. The forest, once merely a challenging backdrop, had become an oppressive force. Ethan found himself questioning everything he had once relied upon: his instincts, his training, even his understanding of reality. Each step deeper into the Cascade Mountains brought them closer to completing their mission, but it also carried them further into a realm where logic and reason seemed to falter. Ethan's transformation during those days was as much internal as it was external. The man who had arrived in the Cascades with unwavering confidence now wrestled with doubts and fears he could not articulate. He knew his team looked to him for guidance, for strength, and he resolved to see them through to the end. Yet, in the quiet moments when he was alone with his thoughts, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone, and that whatever was out there had plans of its own. The Cascade Mountains were not just a place. They were an entity, alive with their own rhythms, mysteries, and quiet terrors. For Ethan and his team, life in the forest was a constant negotiation with the forces of nature, a precarious balance between survival and surrender to the wilderness. Every day presented new challenges, not just in the form of physical labor, but also in the creeping realization that the forest was a world unto itself, one that seemed to reject their presence. Ethan's team had settled into a grueling routine. At sunrise, they packed up their sparse belongings, doused the remains of their fire, and set out into the dense forest, their boots sinking into the moist, uneven ground. Navigation was a painstaking process. The canopy above was so dense that sunlight barely filtered through, casting the forest floor in a dim, perpetual twilight. Compass readings were unreliable, often swinging wildly as if some unseen force were interfering with their equipment. Ethan was forced to rely on his instincts, using landmarks like oddly shaped trees or clusters of boulders to chart their course. The team moved in near silence, each member hyper-aware of their surroundings. The usual banter and camaraderie that characterized military units were absent here, replaced by a tense, almost reverent quiet. The forest demanded their attention, its every sound a potential signal of danger. A snapping twig could be the movement of an animal, or something far less benign. The rustle of leaves overhead might be the wind, but it could also be something watching from the shadows. The soldiers' senses were constantly on high alert, their bodies taut with the effort of maintaining vigilance. Meals were meager, consisting mostly of ration packs supplemented by whatever they could forage. The forest offered an abundance of plant life, but much of it was unfamiliar and potentially dangerous. Ethan had some knowledge of edible plants from his training, but he was cautious, unwilling to take risks with his team's health. The streams they encountered provided fresh water, but even that required purification to avoid illness. Every action, no matter how small, carried the weight of survival. Gathering wood for a fire, setting up a shelter, or even taking a moment to rest had to be done with precision and purpose. The physical toll of the environment was undeniable. The constant dampness seeped into their clothing and gear, making everything heavier and less functional. Their boots became caked with mud, and their fingers were perpetually wrinkled from the moisture. Blisters formed on their feet, exacerbated by the uneven terrain, and small cuts and scrapes from branches and underbrush became constant irritants. Despite their best efforts to maintain hygiene, the forest seemed intent on wearing them down, its damp embrace an unrelenting assault on their bodies. Yet it was the psychological toll that weighed most heavily. The forest's silence, broken only by the occasional cry of a bird or the distant rustle of leaves, was oppressive. It was not the peaceful silence of a tranquil meadow, but the heavy, watchful silence of a predator stalking its prey. The soldiers began to talk in hushed tones, as if speaking too loudly might awaken something they could not see. Even Ethan, who prided himself on his composure, found himself growing uneasy. He often caught himself glancing over his shoulder, scanning the shadows for movement, even when he knew logically that nothing was there. At night, the forest came alive with a different energy. The darkness was absolute, the kind that seemed to swallow the light of their campfire. Shadows danced on the trees, their shapes shifting and twisting in ways that defied explanation. The sounds of the forest grew louder, more insistent, the distant hoot of an owl, the crack of a branch, the rustle of leaves carried on a wind they couldn't feel. Sleep was elusive. Ethan and his team took turns keeping watch, but even those not on duty found little rest. They lay in their sleeping bags, listening to the forest breathe around them, their minds racing with imagined threats. It was during one of these nights that Ethan experienced something he couldn't rationalize. He had taken the first watch, sitting by the fire with his rifle resting across his knees. The others were asleep, their forms barely visible under the makeshift shelters. The fire crackled softly, its light flickering against the trunks of nearby trees. For a time, all was quiet. Then, without warning, the forest seemed to shift. The sounds of the night, the insects, the distant calls of animals, fell silent, leaving a void that was almost deafening. Ethan sat up straighter, his senses on high alert. He scanned the darkness beyond the firelight, his eyes straining to penetrate the shadows. At first, he saw nothing. Then, just at the edge of his vision, he caught movement. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, a shadow that seemed to move against the grain of the trees. He gripped his rifle tighter, his pulse quickening. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice firm but low. There was no response, only the silence pressing in around him. Ethan rose to his feet, his boots crunching softly against the forest floor. He took a cautious step forward, keeping the fire at his back as he moved closer to the edge of the clearing. The shadow was gone, but the unease remained. He stood there for several minutes, his heart pounding in his chest, before finally retreating to the fire. The forest remained silent for the rest of the night, but Ethan didn't sleep. The next morning, he chose not to share the experience with his team. They were already on edge, and he didn't want to add to their fears. But he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the forest itself was alive and aware of their presence. Over the next few days, more incidents occurred. Hayes, the youngest member of the team, claimed to hear voices in the distance, soft, indistinct whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. Miller found more strange markings on the trees, symbols that looked almost like warnings. Even the animals seemed to avoid them. The forest, which should have been teeming with life, felt eerily empty. As the days turned into nights, the team's morale began to fray. Exhaustion and fear took their toll, eroding the bonds of camaraderie that had held them together. Arguments broke out over minor decisions. Tempers flared, and trust began to waver. Ethan did his best to hold the group together, to remind them of their training and the importance of staying focused. But he, 2. Felt the strain. The forest was not just a place, it was a force, one that seemed intent on breaking them. By the end of the week, Ethan knew they couldn't stay much longer. The mission was taking a toll that went beyond the physical. The forest had become a living nightmare. Its every shadow a potential threat, its silence a constant reminder of their vulnerability. Yet, despite the fear and the exhaustion, Ethan also felt a strange sense of determination. The forest had pushed them to their limits, but it had also revealed their strength. They had endured what many would consider impossible, and they had done so together. Ethan's resolve to see the mission through to its end was not just a matter of pride. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. The forest had tested them, but it had not broken them. And though he didn't fully understand what they had encountered in the depths of the Cascades, Ethan knew that they had emerged stronger for it. The forest, with all its mysteries and terrors, had become a part of them, a memory that would linger long after they had left its shadowed embrace. The sixth night in the Cascade Mountains began like the others, the team setting up camp in the dim light of the late afternoon, their movements slow and deliberate after a day of grueling travel. The clearing they had chosen was small, surrounded on all sides by towering pines whose branches interwove to form a near-impenetrable canopy. The air was heavy with moisture, and a light drizzle had begun to fall, dampening their already sodden gear. Ethan crouched near the fire pit, coaxing a small flame to life as his team prepared their makeshift shelters. The mood in the camp was tense. Each member of the squad carried the weight of days spent battling exhaustion, fear, and the unnerving sense of being watched. Even the forest itself seemed to reflect their unease, its usual hum of nocturnal life subdued as if it, too, were holding its breath. Ethan could feel the tension in the air, a palpable undercurrent that made his skin prickle. He had seen it in the eyes of his team during the day, the furtive glances into the trees, the nervous habits they had developed, like checking their weapons more frequently or keeping their backs to solid objects. By the time night fell, the drizzle had turned into a steady rain, its rhythmic patter on the leaves providing a backdrop to the flickering firelight. The team huddled close to the flames, their voices low as they discussed the plan for the following day. Despite Ethan's efforts to maintain a sense of normalcy, the conversations were clipped, the pauses between words filled with an unspoken dread. He assigned the night's watch shifts, taking the first himself, a decision born partly from duty and partly from the need to be alone with his thoughts. As the others retreated to their shelters, Ethan sat by the fire, his rifle resting across his knees. The flames cast dancing shadows on the trees, their movement almost hypnotic. He stared into the darkness beyond the clearing, his ears straining to pick up any sound beyond the rain and the crackle of the fire. For a time, all was still. Then, just as he began to relax, he heard it, a sound that did not belong. It was faint at first, barely discernible over the rain, but as he focused, it became clearer, a slow, deliberate crunching of leaves, as if something heavy were moving through the underbrush just beyond the edge of the clearing. Ethan's grip on his rifle tightened, his pulse quickening. He scanned the darkness, his eyes searching for movement, but the firelight only reached so far, and beyond it lay an impenetrable wall of shadows. The sound grew louder, closer, until it seemed to circle the clearing. Ethan rose slowly to his feet, his movements deliberate to avoid making noise. He felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end, a primal reaction to a threat he could not yet see. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice firm but not loud enough to wake the others. There was no response, only the continued rustling and crunching of leaves. Ethan moved toward the edge of the clearing, his rifle at the ready. The sound stopped abruptly, as if whatever was out there had frozen in place. He stood there for several moments, his breath shallow, his senses on high alert. Then, from somewhere to his left, he heard it again, a low, guttural growl that sent a chill down his spine. It was unlike any animal sound he had heard before, deep and resonant, almost human in its cadence. He took a step back, his mind racing through possibilities. A bear? Unlikely, given the location and the sound's peculiar quality. A predator of some kind? Perhaps. But there was something about it that defied explanation. The growl seemed to reverberate through the clearing, an unsettling vibration that Ethan felt in his chest as much as he heard it. The team began to stir, awakened by the tension in the air and the sound of movement. Miller was the first to emerge from his shelter, his face pale and his weapon drawn. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ethan motioned for him to stay quiet, his eyes still locked on the darkness. "Something's out there," he said, his tone grim. "Stay sharp." The growl came again, closer this time, followed by a series of heavy, deliberate footsteps. The sound was unnerving, each step falling with a weight that suggested something massive. Ethan motioned for the others to spread out, forming a loose perimeter around the fire. They moved with practiced precision, their training taking over even as fear threatened to paralyze them. For several minutes, the forest was silent once more, save for the rain and the occasional crackle of the fire. Then, from the darkness, a shadow emerged. It was fleeting, barely visible at the edge of the firelight, but it was enough to send a jolt of adrenaline through the team. The shape was tall, impossibly so, and moved with a fluidity that seemed unnatural. It disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, melting back into the shadows, but its presence left a mark. "What the hell was that?" Hayes whispered, his voice trembling. Ethan didn't answer. He didn't know. He had no frame of reference for what he had just seen, no way to rationalize it within the bounds of logic. He could only focus on the immediate task of keeping his team safe. The next several hours were a blur of tension and unease. The shadow did not reappear, but the team could hear it, heavy footsteps, the occasional snap of a branch, and, at one point, a low, echoing whistle that sent shivers down their spines. It felt as though whatever was out there was toying with them, testing their resolve. The psychological strain was immense. Each member of the team was on edge, their nerves frayed by the constant threat of the unknown. When dawn finally broke, the forest seemed to exhale, the oppressive tension lifting slightly with the arrival of daylight. But the team was far from reassured. As they surveyed the area, they found evidence of their nocturnal visitor. Deep impressions in the mud circled the clearing, large, elongated footprints that defied any known animal. The tracks were spaced far apart, as if whatever had made them was capable of covering immense distances with each step. Ethan knelt by one of the tracks, his jaw tightening as he studied it. The print was roughly twice the size of his boot, with long, claw-like indentations at the tips. It was unlike anything he had ever encountered, and the implications were troubling. Whatever had visited them during the night was not only massive, but also intelligent enough to remain unseen despite its size. He rose to his feet, addressing the team with a calm he didn't entirely feel. "We're moving out," he said. "We'll break camp and head for higher ground. Stay close and stay alert. Whatever this thing is, we're not going to make it easy for it to find us again." The team complied without question, their fear tempered by their trust in Ethan's leadership. As they packed up their gear and prepared to move out, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was watching them, its shadows hiding secrets he was not meant to understand. The encounter had left an indelible mark on him, a reminder that there were forces in the world that defied explanation, and that sometimes survival meant accepting the unknown and moving forward despite it. The following day brought a faint glimmer of hope in the form of weak sunlight breaking through the dense canopy above. For the first time in days, the rain had eased, leaving the forest damp but quiet. Ethan hoped that the break in the weather might offer some reprieve, both physically and mentally, for his team. Yet the lingering unease from the previous night was palpable. No one spoke as they broke camp, their movements mechanical and hurried, as if the forest itself might decide to swallow them whole if they lingered too long. Ethan led the way, navigating through the tangled underbrush with a steady, determined pace. The higher ground was their target, a rocky outcrop that, according to his map, should provide them with a vantage point and some sense of security. But even as he focused on the path ahead, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. Every so often, he would stop and listen, his eyes scanning the shadows. But the forest remained stubbornly still, its silence as oppressive as ever. By midday, They reached the base of the ridge. The climb was steep and arduous, made more challenging by the slick, muddy ground and the weight of their gear. The team moved in single file, their breathing labored but steady as they ascended. Ethan could feel the strain in his legs and lungs, but he pushed forward, driven by a need to distance them from whatever had visited their camp the night before. As they climbed higher, the forest began to thin, the dense trees giving way to scraggly shrubs and exposed rock. The air grew cooler, and the wind picked up, carrying with it a faint, almost metallic scent that Ethan couldn't place. It was faint at first, barely noticeable, but it grew stronger as they climbed. He glanced back at his team, their faces drawn and pale, and knew they smelled it too. No one said a word, but the unspoken question hung heavy in the air. What could produce such a smell? They reached the summit in the late afternoon, the sun dipping low on the horizon. The rocky outcrop jutted out over the valley below, offering a breathtaking view of the surrounding landscape. For a moment, the team allowed themselves to breathe, to take in the beauty of the mountains bathed in the warm, golden light of the setting sun. But the moment was fleeting. The sense of unease that had followed them like a shadow was still there, more pronounced than ever in the open expanse of the summit. Ethan began setting up their camp, instructing the others to secure the perimeter and gather firewood. He chose a spot near the edge of the outcrop, where the sheer drop offered a natural barrier on one side. The team worked quickly and efficiently, their movements tense but practiced. As night fell, they lit a fire, its flickering flames casting long shadows against the rocky terrain. The wind picked up as darkness settled over the mountains, its mournful howl echoing through the valleys below. The team huddled close to the fire, their rifles within arm's reach. No one spoke, the weight of the previous night's encounter pressing down on them like a physical force. Ethan took the first watch again, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the firelight. It was during his watch that he saw it. At first, it was just a shadow, a dark shape that moved against the backdrop of the starlit sky. Ethan blinked, thinking his eyes were playing tricks on him, but the shape remained, growing more defined as it approached the summit. He felt his heart begin to race, his hand tightening around his rifle as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. The figure was tall, unnaturally so, its limbs elongated and thin. It moved with a slow, deliberate grace, as if it had all the time in the world. Ethan's throat went dry as the figure stopped at the edge of the summit, its silhouette stark against the sky. It stood there, motionless, its head tilted slightly as if observing them. The firelight didn't reach far enough to illuminate its features, but Ethan could feel its gaze, cold and unrelenting, fixed on him. He raised his rifle, his finger hovering over the trigger, but something stopped him, a deep, instinctual sense that firing would only make things worse. The others stirred, sensing his unease. Miller was the first to notice the figure, his eyes widening in shock. "What the hell is that?" he whispered, his voice trembling. The rest of the team turned to look, their expressions shifting from confusion to fear as they saw the figure. For a long, agonizing moment, no one moved. The figure remained still, its presence oppressive and surreal, like a shadow that had stepped out of a nightmare. Then, without warning, it turned and walked away, its movements fluid and almost otherworldly. It disappeared over the ridge, leaving the team in stunned silence. Ethan lowered his rifle, his hands shaking. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus. "Stay alert," he said, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his chest. "It's gone, but we're not taking any chances." The team remained on high alert for the rest of the night, their eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of the figure's return. But the hours passed without incident, and when dawn finally broke, the summit was bathed in a soft, golden light that seemed almost incongruous with the terror of the night before. As they prepared to leave, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the figure had been watching them for longer than they realized. The sense of being followed, the strange sounds in the night, it all pointed to something that had been tracking them, studying them. He didn't know what it was or what it wanted, but he knew one thing for certain. They needed to get out of the forest, and fast. The descent from the summit was grueling, the team's exhaustion compounded by the psychological strain of the encounter. They moved quickly but cautiously, their eyes constantly scanning the trees for any sign of the figure. The forest seemed different now, its silence heavier, its shadows deeper. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a branch sent a jolt of adrenaline through the group. By the time they reached the valley floor, the sun was high in the sky, its warmth doing little to ease their fear. They paused to regroup, their breaths coming in heavy gasps as they planned their next move. Ethan checked his map, his eyes scanning the terrain for the quickest route out of the mountains. They still had several days of travel ahead of them, but he was determined to push through, to put as much distance as possible between them and whatever was stalking them. As they set off again, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that their ordeal was far from over. The figure on the summit had been a warning, a reminder that they were intruders in a place they didn't understand, and as the forest closed in around them once more, he knew that the mountains still had more secrets to reveal. The story of Sergeant Ethan and his team in the Cascade Mountains was not the first of its kind. Strange encounters in remote training environments had long been whispered about among soldiers, shared in hushed tones over campfires or during long watches in the dead of night. But few stories carried the weight and credibility of those told by Corporal James. His experience at Fort Riley, Kansas, bore unsettling similarities to what Ethan's team was enduring, leaving an indelible mark on everyone who heard it. Corporal James had been stationed at Fort Riley for over 3 years, a veteran of numerous field exercises conducted in the dense woodlands and sprawling prairies that surrounded the base. The terrain there was vastly different from the Cascade Mountains, less mountainous but no less imposing, with thick groves of oak and hickory trees, rolling hills, and isolated patches of open grassland. It was during one such exercise, conducted in the heart of the fort's training area, that James encountered something he could neither explain nor forget. It began innocuously enough. James was part of a small reconnaissance team tasked with navigating a section of forest known for its challenging terrain. The exercise was designed to test their ability to move undetected, relying on stealth and careful planning to avoid simulated enemy patrols. The mission required them to operate under radio silence, communicating only through hand signals and prearranged visual markers. For the first 2 days, everything proceeded as expected. The team moved methodically, covering ground during the day and setting up concealed campsites at night. On the third night, however, things took an unusual turn. James's team had established a campsite in a clearing surrounded by dense undergrowth. The area was well chosen, offering both cover and a clear line of sight in all directions. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the forest grew dark, the team settled into their routine. James was assigned the second watch, scheduled to take over just after midnight. When his shift began, the camp was quiet, save for the soft rustle of leaves and the occasional chirp of a distant cricket. The air was cool, and a faint mist had begun to settle over the ground, creating an otherworldly atmosphere. James sat near the perimeter of the camp, his rifle resting across his lap, his eyes scanning the darkness. At first, everything seemed normal, but as the minutes ticked by, he began to notice something odd. The usual sounds of the forest, the calls of nocturnal animals, the rustling of small creatures in the underbrush, had faded. In their place was an unsettling silence, heavy and oppressive. James felt a prickling sensation on the back of his neck, an instinctual warning that something was amiss. He strained his ears, listening for any sign of movement, but the stillness was absolute. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw it, a faint light flickering in the distance, just beyond the edge of the clearing. At first, he thought it might be a campfire from another team or a reflection of moonlight on water, but as he focused, he realized the light was moving, weaving through the trees in an erratic pattern. It was unlike anything he had seen before, its glow pale and cold, more like the phosphorescent shimmer of a jellyfish than the warm flicker of a flame. James hesitated, debating whether to wake the others. Part of him wanted to dismiss the light as a trick of the eyes, a natural phenomenon he couldn't immediately explain, but his gut told him otherwise. He rose slowly to his feet, keeping his rifle at the ready, and took a cautious step toward the edge of the clearing. As he did, the light seemed to react. pausing in its movement as if aware of his presence. "Who's out there?" James called softly, his voice steady despite the unease building inside him. There was no response, only the faint hum of the light as it hovered in place. James took another step forward, his pulse quickening. The light remained still for a moment longer, then suddenly darted to the left, vanishing into the undergrowth. James's heart pounded in his chest as he returned to the camp and quietly roused his team leader. Together, they decided to investigate, reasoning that the light could be a signal from another team in distress or an indication of something else requiring their attention. They moved cautiously, keeping low and staying within the cover of the trees. As they advanced toward the area where James had seen the light, they encountered something that made them stop in their tracks. There, in the middle of the forest, was a small circle of flattened grass, its edges perfectly round as if pressed down by a massive weight. At the center of the circle lay a cluster of stones, arranged in a spiral pattern that seemed too deliberate to be natural. The air in the area felt different, heavier, almost charged, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. James knelt to examine the stones, but as he reached out to touch one, a sudden noise made him freeze. It was a low, guttural growl, coming from the darkness beyond the circle. The sound was deep and resonant, vibrating through the ground and into James's chest. He rose slowly, his eyes scanning the forest, but the source of the sound remained hidden. The growl was followed by a series of clicks and whistles, a sequence of noises that seemed almost like a language. Then, without warning, the light reappeared, this time much closer, its glow illuminating the trees in an eerie, unnatural hue. James and his team backed away, their weapons trained on the light as it hovered in place. For a moment, it seemed to pulse, growing brighter and dimmer in a rhythmic pattern. Then it shot upward, disappearing into the canopy and leaving them in darkness once more. The growl had ceased, but the sense of unease lingered. The team quickly retreated to their campsite, where they spent the remainder of the night on high alert. The next morning, they found no trace of the light or the sounds that had accompanied it. The circle of flattened grass and the spiral of stones remained, but even those seemed less vivid in the daylight, their unsettling quality diminished by the warmth of the sun. Despite their best efforts to rationalize what they had experienced, the team could not shake the feeling that they had encountered something beyond their understanding. James's account of that night was met with skepticism by some and quiet belief by others. To those who had served in remote training environments, his story was disturbingly familiar, echoing tales of strange lights, unexplained sounds, and encounters with entities that defied classification. For Ethan, who would later hear James's story, it was a chilling reminder that the unknown was not confined to one location or one team. Whatever forces haunted the Cascades and Fort Riley, they were part of a larger mystery, one that would continue to linger in the minds of those who dared to confront it. The mysteries surrounding the strange events in the Cascade Mountains and Fort Riley stirred endless speculation among those who heard the stories. Soldiers, trainers, and even skeptics debated the possibilities late into the night, attempting to explain the inexplicable. From cryptid theories to psychological phenomena, the range of hypotheses reflected the human desire to make sense of the unknown. For Sergeant Ethan and Corporal James, however, no theory could fully encapsulate what they had experienced firsthand. The events defied categorization, leaving them with a mix of unanswered questions and lingering dread. One of the most widely discussed theories was that the phenomena were caused by undiscovered wildlife. The forests of the Cascade Mountains and the prairies of Kansas were vast, containing ecosystems that remained largely unexplored by modern science. Could the figures and sounds have been the actions of rare or undiscovered creatures? The footprints Ethan's team had found, elongated, clawed, and unervingly large, might suggest a cryptid, a species unknown to human understanding. The growls and clicking noises reported by both teams further supported this idea. However, skeptics pointed out the inconsistencies. No known predator moved with such speed or displayed such behavior, and the glowing light seen by James's team seemed far beyond the realm of natural biology. Others proposed that the events were the result of military experiments, The areas where both incidents occurred were near military installations, leading to speculation that the soldiers had stumbled upon classified projects. Could the glowing lights have been drones or advanced surveillance equipment? Were the strange sounds and markings part of psychological warfare experiments designed to test the mental resilience of troops in training? While this theory offered a rational explanation, it failed to account for the physical evidence, the footprints, the unnatural movements of the figures, and the spiral of stones found in Fort Riley. A third theory delved into the supernatural. The forests and mountains have long been associated with folklore, tales of spirits, and otherworldly entities. Some soldiers speculated that Ethan's team had disturbed an ancient, protective force in the Cascade Mountains, something tied to the land itself. The deliberate markings on the trees and the calculated movements of the figure on the ridge suggested an intelligence that transcended the animalistic. Likewise, the spiral of stones found by James's team hinted at ritualistic or symbolic intent. Could these have been signs of a connection to a dimension beyond human comprehension? Such ideas, while compelling, were often dismissed by more pragmatic minds as fanciful or irrational. Another popular explanation revolved around psychological stress and group hysteria. Training exercises in extreme environments are designed to push soldiers to their physical and mental limits. Prolonged isolation, sleep deprivation, and constant vigilance could create the perfect conditions for hallucinations and misinterpretations. In this view, the sounds, lights, and shadows were products of the soldiers' overtaxed minds, magnified by their collective fear. However, this theory was met with resistance from Ethan and James, both of whom insisted that what they had witnessed was real. The physical evidence, footprints, markings, and displaced objects could not be easily dismissed as figments of their imagination. Perhaps the most unsettling theory was the possibility of extraterrestrial involvement. The glowing light that James and his team had observed bore a striking resemblance to descriptions of UFO phenomena reported around the world. The light's movements, erratic, fast, and deliberate, were consistent with accounts of unidentified aerial phenomena. Could the entities stalking Ethan's team have been extraterrestrial beings, observing or interacting with the soldiers for reasons unknown? The idea was met with skepticism but lingered nonetheless, feeding into the growing unease that surrounded the incidents. For Ethan, no single explanation felt satisfactory. He replayed the events in his mind, searching for details that might clarify what they had encountered. He recalled the figure's unnaturally fluid movements, its ability to vanish into the shadows despite its size. He thought about the heavy, oppressive silence of the forest, as if the environment itself had been altered by the entity's presence. Each memory reinforced his belief that they had encountered something beyond the ordinary, something that defied both scientific and supernatural classification. James, too, struggled to reconcile his experience. The spiral of stones and the sudden appearance of the light were etched into his memory, as was the growl that had resonated through the forest. He spoke with other soldiers who had served at Fort Riley, discovering similar stories that had been passed down over the years. Some described seeing figures at the edge of their vision, always disappearing before they could be clearly identified. Others spoke of strange lights in the distance, hovering silently before vanishing into the night. These accounts, while fragmented and anecdotal, painted a picture of phenomena that transcended individual encounters. Both Ethan and James were haunted by the same question. Why? Why had these entities chosen to reveal themselves? Were they territorial, reacting to the presence of the soldiers as a threat? Or were they curious, observing the humans with detached interest? The deliberate actions of the entities suggested intelligence and intent, but their ultimate purpose remained a mystery. This lack of understanding was perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the encounters. It left the soldiers feeling vulnerable, as if they had been unwitting participants in a larger narrative they could not comprehend. The aftermath of the incidents was marked by a lingering sense of paranoia. Ethan and his team completed their training mission, but returned to base with a newfound wariness of the wilderness. James, too, carried his experience with him, sharing his story only with those he trusted. The official reports filed by both teams were vague, omitting the more fantastical elements in favor of sanitized accounts that emphasized environmental challenges and physical endurance. Yet the stories persisted, spreading through the ranks as whispers and rumors, adding to the growing tapestry of unexplained phenomena tied to military training grounds. Over time, the theories about what Ethan and James had encountered began to blur together, creating a mosaic of speculation that encompassed science, folklore, and the paranormal. The soldiers who heard the stories added their own interpretations, some embellishing the details while others dismissed them entirely. For Ethan and James, however, the truth remained elusive. They were left with fragments of a puzzle that refused to fit together, pieces of a larger mystery that would haunt them for years to come. The experiences of Sergeant Ethan and Corporal James left a profound impact, not only on them but on everyone who heard their stories. These encounters, shrouded in mystery, served as a sobering reminder of the unpredictable and often incomprehensible nature of the world. For those who faced these phenomena directly, the events were more than just unexplained occurrences, they were transformative, forcing them to confront their fears, question their beliefs, and find strength in their vulnerabilities. Ethan's return from the Cascade Mountains marked a turning point in his life. The stoic and confident leader who had embarked on the mission was now a man burdened by questions he could not answer. In the weeks following his return, Ethan struggled to articulate what he had experienced. Official debriefings glossed over the more unsettling details, focusing instead on the team's navigation, resourcefulness, and endurance. But the memories of the shadowy figure, the growls in the night, and the oppressive silence of the forest refused to fade. For Ethan, the most valuable lesson was the importance of adaptability and resilience. The Cascade Mountains had tested him and his team in ways no training manual could prepare them for. The encounters with the unknown had pushed them to their limits, forcing them to rely not only on their physical skills but also on their mental and emotional strength. Ethan realized that leadership was not just about giving orders, it was about providing a sense of stability and purpose, even in the face of incomprehensible danger. His ability to keep his team focused and united during those harrowing nights was a testament to the power of trust and camaraderie. Similarly, James emerged from his experience at Fort Riley with a new perspective on fear and courage. The strange lights and the spiral of stones had shaken him to his core, challenging his understanding of reality. But rather than succumbing to fear, James chose to embrace the uncertainty. He saw it as a reminder of the vastness of the world and the limits of human knowledge. The encounter had taught him the value of humility and the importance of keeping an open mind. As a soldier, he knew the importance of preparation and discipline, but his experience in the woods had shown him that some challenges required more than just physical readiness. They demanded a willingness to confront the unknown. For both men, the encounters also reinforced the significance of teamwork and solidarity. The bonds formed during those tense moments in the forest were unbreakable, forged in the crucible of shared hardship. Ethan and his team had faced their fears together, drawing strength from one another when the weight of the unknown threatened to overwhelm them. James, too, had relied on his fellow soldiers to navigate the unsettling events at Fort Riley. These experiences underscored the importance of trust and mutual support, not just in military operations but in all aspects of life. The broader implications of their stories were not lost on those who heard them. In a world increasingly dominated by technology and certainty, the tales of unexplained phenomena served as a reminder of the mysteries that still lingered in the shadows. They challenged the notion that humans had mastered their environment, highlighting the fragile balance between understanding and ignorance. The forests, mountains, and prairies where these encounters took place were more than just training grounds. They were reminders of nature's power and the depths of its secrets. Ethan and James eventually returned to their respective duties, their lives resuming a semblance of normalcy. Yet the experiences stayed with them, shaping the way they approached their roles as soldiers and leaders. Ethan became an advocate for mental resilience training, emphasizing the importance of psychological preparedness in addition to physical conditioning. He believed that the challenges his team had faced in the Cascade Mountains were as much mental as they were physical. and he sought to ensure that future soldiers were equipped to handle both. James, meanwhile, delved into the history and folklore of the areas surrounding Fort Riley. He discovered stories passed down by local residents, tales of strange lights and unexplained disappearances that mirrored his own experience. These accounts, though often dismissed as superstition, resonated with him, providing a sense of connection to a larger narrative. James began to share his story with others, not as a warning, but as an invitation to remain curious and open-minded. He believed that the unknown should not be feared but respected, a challenge to explore the limits of human understanding. For the military as an institution, the events raised questions about the nature of training and the environments chosen for it. While the official stance remained focused on the practical aspects of survival and navigation, the whispers of Ethan's and James's encounters spread through the ranks, becoming part of the unofficial lore shared among soldiers. These stories served as both cautionary tales and sources of inspiration, reminding soldiers of the unpredictability of the world and the strength required to face it. In the end, the experiences of Ethan and James were not just about fear or mystery, they were about growth. The encounters forced them to confront their limitations, to adapt to circumstances they could not control, and to find courage in the face of the unknown. They emerged stronger, more aware of their own resilience and the power of the human spirit. The Cascade Mountains and the forests of Fort Riley remained as they were, silent, vast, and enigmatic. For those who ventured into their depths, they offered lessons that could not be taught in any classroom or simulated in any exercise. They were places of challenge and discovery, where the boundaries of knowledge and experience were tested. And for Ethan, James, and countless others, they would forever be remembered as landscapes of transformation, where the line between the known and the unknown blurred, leaving behind stories that would echo for generations.